I'm here to talk about urbanism, and I think at the last Creative Morning, there was another image depicting urbanism, and the one that you just saw depicted urbanism. And the common thing that I see and saw, and the reason I left the architectural office that I was working at in London, is because there was never any people. There were pictures and pictures of buildings and cities and master plans, and there was never a person in the pictures. And yet, what urbanism really is, I think, and I've lived in a few cities, is basically lots of people coming together to live in one big place. And they're not coming for the buildings, they're not coming because the building is very high or because the space is very big. They're coming because they share something and they want to share things together. And so with that as kind of like the urbanism for dummies from my point of view, I'll take you through a few thoughts and ideas. So the question that you had on your sticker there is, how big is the place that you want to live in? And thinking as well of how big is the place that you live in. I grew up in a sort of smallish seaside town, and I think that what's interesting is that whenever I would describe where I grew up, I would say a smallish seaside town, as if the sort of, apart from being next to the sea, the second most important thing was that it was smallish, and that would maybe give you quite an impression of how I grew up and what sort of person I might be compared to if I had grown up in a largish city like Hong Kong. So Hong Kong from above looks rather large. It looks rather daunting. I remember the first time I ever went up, I lived in London, and I went up the very large building in New York City, the Empire State Building. And I looked down and was like, wow, this is like London in 3D. And I don't ever want to live here, I think, because London in 2D was big enough for me, I think. So this is another place, a different type of place. How big is this place? This is a village in Suffolk, which is a part of England, that, you know, people would probably describe that they were from a small place, but in another sense, they've got a lot of space here, compared to perhaps the people in Hong Kong who live in a space this size. Whereas in Suffolk, this is one of my favorite buildings that I worked with in London, an architect who designed this house that has got enough room that the whole house can slide off the glass house underneath, and he can have a sun house if it's nice weather, and he can have a really warm house if he slides it back. It's on little train tracks, and I thought that was quite cool, but you could never build that in Hong Kong. Then there's another factor which has been on my mind. I was telling Calais that last year, actually when I was pregnant, we got a letter in the post to say that we would have to move out of our apartment in the next month. And a sudden sense of sort of place and affordability came to mind, of the pressure, the sort of supply and demand of cities. In Munich, since we arrived here, I think anyone seeing the posters around for the election coming up can see that rent and sort of jostling for space in the city is another part of urbanism. That's the kind of reality. So here's an article in a Vancouver newspaper. Can you afford to live here? Having to decide if that's your home. And how big is another place? This is quite a common sight. I used to take the train up from Munich to Berlin quite often, and you'd see villages in East Germany that there was a lot of space. You could pretty much take a whole building over for free. You can go live there if you want, and you can. You could move in rent-free in a lot of places up there. So size matters. That's something to do with urbanism, is scale, big and small, and how you see it. So as I saw it when I was working in architecture, the way that cities are designed, and these days they are very much designed. Previously people came together and there was a river crossing, a bridge, and natural things there that made sense for people to congregate. These days, my husband's company is building a city from scratch in the middle of Kazakhstan, and it does raise the questions of, you know, what the reasons are for bringing these people together, and What's the cause and effect? Is it the city bringing people together, or is it people coming together to form a city? And essentially, I saw this as a bird's eye view of cities. And then what I see, actually, when Calais introduced the CreativeMornings, you see a world map with lots of dots on. And I've worked at a few companies, and every single company I've worked at has a map with a few dots on. And if you have ever seen this magazine Monocle, it rates cities. And I see it very similar to the way that maybe technological devices are rated with specs. So you see the top 10 listings, and every year they jostle around, and Sydney's gone up one, and Berlin's gone down one, and Madrid's gone up again. And it seems strange to me that that these cities where people came together to form their lives have been almost sort of branded in such a way that they're like products. And I think a lot of reasons for doing that is a financial reason. So cities are fighting and competing now because of various issues like easy transport and globalization to draw people to these cities. So if you've got a company, you think about where to set up your company based on where people are going to be and where infrastructure is. And so these specs become very important, whereas previously somebody who was from London, and they would never think of suddenly moving to go and live in Hyderabad in India. They were more or less rooted. And I think sometimes we need to remember that we are not birds, and we are not banks. This is a clothing company from the UK who send out their packages with little lines, and one I liked was buy land, they don't make it anymore. So thinking of it as a product, and the fact that land is, there's a finite amount of it, and we need to think a bit about what we're doing with it. So instead of bird's eye views and bank's eye views, thinking about people, there was, recently I was speaking to a neighbour who was also having some issues about rent. And they just said this quote. They said, these are not simply spaces, these are our lives. When thinking about regulations, about prices, about thinking of these spaces as investments. And we've had the economic crisis, which shows what happens when we sort of lose sight of this living environment and think of it as buying products to buy and sell, and think of them too much as sort of commodities. And there's a project that I'll talk a little bit about later. I'll show you again, and it's just this little sticker always strikes me. In a neighbourhood of empty buildings, someone writes, "I wish this was a home." And we want people around us. We don't move to cities so that we can be the only ones living in these very big buildings. We want people, and we want neighbourhoods. So a few urbanism issues. The sky's the limit. Thinking about urbanism in terms of, let's say the architect comes in and thinks very much about scale in terms of floor space and how big things are going to be. And the developers who put these buildings here, they think of it in terms of money. They are investing in building something, and they want to have some money back from that. So they're thinking about rent. And the people urbanism you can see it across all the cities, and especially what seems to be happening is that as we're accelerating towards having all these dots on the map, where no part of that map will want to be without a dot. If you're living somewhere, your government, you see adverts for Munich wanting another, let's say, airport landing strip. And the rationale they'll give people is, if we don't have another landing strip, we'll be a Dorf, we'll be a village. There's a picture of people in Dirndls as if we don't get this landing strip, we won't be like New York. We will be a village. And the fact is that we won't be a village. This is a fair-sized city, and there's not just two types of places. There's places in between. And with that mentality, there are people all over the world in these cities fighting for their rights to live, because this is their lives. These are not spaces. So the sky's the limit, and that's also with prices and affordability that we saw. Another issue which comes with that is this sort of same but different. I don't know if I used to do a lot of travelling at one point, too much travelling, and I remember this this odd sensation of leaving one airport and maybe leaving a Starbucks and arriving in another airport and being totally excited about going to this new place and coming out and thinking, this is weird, I don't know where I am, this is exactly the same as where I left. And just seeing cities under pressure to be the best city, the biggest city, that number one city, all trying to be different and unique, and yet all pushing towards being the same city. So, so what does that mean for what does that end up making a city? Is there any point to go to Sydney if Sydney ends up in a few years being exactly like Paris? And that ties in with travel. How many people here are from Munich originally? Right. And I'm sure that if you went back to that map and asked people at the CreativeMornings, you know, how many people were from that city that the CreativeMorning is happening, there'll be about the same maybe number of hands. We are everywhere. We are moving city as if we are, you know, going shopping. We're moving here for an experience, and we're moving there. And I'm the same. My mother came from Malaysia. She moved to the UK. I moved to Sydney. I moved to Germany. I have a little boy who I have absolutely no idea. He's got few passports, and I don't know really, you know, what he is. Where are his roots? And this is accelerating, and I have no idea what the future holds for that sensation. And one thing that's happening with that is that as these cities merge to become these cities, they're losing a connection from their country, perhaps. I know people who they have a house in London, they've got a flat in Berlin, and they go to New York every once in a while, and they're much more connected to those cities than they are when they're in Berlin to that area around. These are some ghost towns around Berlin, and there's people from all over the world in Berlin, and then you go out a little bit and you'll find desolate areas of where there's not even a shop anymore, and there's a mobile cart to come and sell your milk. It's very strange, and it's another thing that's accelerating, and it's accelerating all over the world, especially in the developing nations. So China, you'll have whole areas which are ghost, not even towns anymore, but regions. So a few ideas, just to see where we could go. And we're in a studio here that works in digital design, and thinking about what happens there. So you've got the architectural layer, you've got the kind of financial aspect of cities, and then something that's happening on the one hand, all these changes, this ability to move and be everyone everywhere, the digital aspect of our lives that is meaning. You can look on your phone and see where you want to go. You can you've got much more of a view on the whole world than you did a generation ago. The world is smaller, it seems smaller, and a lot of that is to do with our technology. But some of these issues that we're feeling, they may also be able to be challenged with that. So an idea called night and day. So most cities are leading to this. This is the London scenario. You've got zones 1 to 6. Most of what you need to do, most people are moving there because of zone 1. A little bit different now because things have shifted to the east. But in general, you're there because of things in zone 1. But you can afford to live in zone 6. And so in cities all over the world, you get this. And this is the part of the city that a lot of people leave because of. This is the falling asleep between 2 sweaty armpits daily. And something I don't miss at all about London. And so wondering, at the same time, when you do go into the city at night, there are vast amounts of empty buildings. The lights are on, but nobody is home, literally. And just a thought. This is Thomas Edison. He used to sleep in his office quite regularly, and he used to get better ideas, he thought, when he did that. So when I was in London sometimes thinking, I have to now, it's late, I'm going to get on that train, I'm going to sit between the sweaty armpits, and I'm going to appear in whatever zone it is, and tomorrow morning after sleeping, I'm going to be here. And I saw an office with the office slid out, and there was a nice bed area, so it was a small office, and if anyone was working late, they could opt to just sleep in the office. And I thought, I don't want to sleep in my office. It's clear that I'm in the office too much anyway, which is why I'm having this problem. So why not sleep in someone else's office? In these spaces, if they're designed correctly, instead of having to go from zone 100, or the next big number 1 city, into zone 1, you could have the daytime, Al in his office and Bob working in his office, And then at night, the spaces could somehow be designed in a bit of a more intelligent way, and they could switch. And everyone could be living somewhat in a smaller footprint, and fewer people would have to be travelling between armpits. So that's night and day as an idea. And I think with ways that we've got to look at car sharing and availability, sort of things like this, I don't think that it's so crazy. Another aspect of cities that I feel very much feel by sort of being in the city, I feel this. The idea of places, we come together in order to be with each other. But more and more within the cities, I feel sometimes a bit responsible working in digital design, that people are being more and more isolated from each other. This is Philadelphia. They've got, I think it was a joke, but they put road markings on to allow people who were going to be distracted by their iPhones to walk down this lane and not get hit by traffic. So this is if you're constantly online. And I saw this hoarding that says, sorry, the lifestyle you ordered is currently out of stock. And I see more and more that there's advertising hoardings, because everyone's advertising online, and there's online, you're putting your marketing money into online media, that a lot of the big advertising spaces in sometimes very central places are empty, and a lot of shops in areas which would have been quite prime areas are empty. And they're filling up. I live in over by the Ostbahnhof, and there's a lot of betting stores come up in the last few years. And I think as online shops are really taking over, there's a lot of questions about what would happen to the real city as we all go virtual. So this is a project by Candy Chang, and this was either in New Orleans or in Utah. I think it's in New Orleans. There's a beautiful piece where there was all these empty shops, and she got these stickers. She's a graphic designer, and they say, I wish this was, and she put them out in the streets, and people could take these stickers and write what they wanted the buildings to be. And I thought this was a much smarter way of planning towns than to be looking again from a bird's eye view or a bank's eye view on what we wanted. To ask the people there, what would you need? And people were suggesting what they wanted around them. But again, you can see that places are becoming empty as we all move out. And I feel this sometimes when if you go to Amsterdam and you ask someone directions, it's very unlikely that they are from Amsterdam. When I was in India, what I realized was that without this infrastructure, they weren't quite there yet when I was there with his connections. People were still very important. So you had barbers on the streets of Kolkata who, they were not just there to shave beards. They became a little node, a social node. Information was around there. People would gather around there. You could do a lot of things around this hub. And we had the old telephone boxes, often next to a post box, often next to some newspaper stands. And all these things, as we go online, we've got our own cell phones. We don't need the post box anymore. We don't need the newspapers, and we don't need the telephone boxes. And we get these little empty spots. And last time I was in London, I came across where I used to work, a guy. He used to work for the post office, delivered letters. He knows everywhere around this area of London. That's very difficult to navigate because it's not at all grid-like. It's very easy to get lost. He was charging 10p for people to come and ask him a question. So 10p, you could ask, where's this? And he would know it because he'd walked the streets his whole life. And it was much faster and much more fun than looking on your phone and trying to struggle with the directions that hadn't been mapped properly. And you got a good chat with a local guy. And I thought, you've got a lot of people in these cities who are from here, people from Munich, who are becoming maybe a little bit isolated from their own city as more and more of the people within Munich are coming from other places. And they're on their phones. So maybe some untapped local gold, maybe in a slightly older gentleman or woman, who maybe is working in a little sausage kiosk or a beer place on the river, and people are going past on their phones, completely oblivious to what they're walking next to. And having sort of more of a connection, maybe there's a service where you can look in and see where your closest little social node is and go find them and speak to them and find out more about the place that you are in by being connected. Okay, I speed up a bit. So basically, lots of people in one place. The essence of urbanism in scale is more about density. And you know that feeling, you get into an elevator and suddenly it's full of people, or you're on that train with the armpits. Density changes the atmosphere and it changes your experience. And we're quite used to things being regulations coming in when we're driving. If we're suddenly in a city area, we have to slow down. If you go on a highway, there's no one there, we speed up. And there's lots of regulations which are like that. And there was recently a discussion about whether or not Airbnb would be allowed to operate in New York City. And to some degree, I remember I have friends there who were complaining about this, saying, you know, it's a freedom, we should be able to use whatever we want to. And I thought, well, there's actually a house near us in Munich which is used for Airbnb, and it's pretty close to the flat that we were kicked out of. And at that point I realised that if there is that much demand from local people and local families to live in these spaces, maybe if someone's got a spare space, they shouldn't be able to use this to make money or to leave properties empty. Maybe in certain areas we need to rethink a little bit about what we're allowing. And the same with connectedness. This is wide open, so all sorts of applications. So maybe you're Googling something, but the phone knows that you are around an area with hundreds of people, and it could say, sorry, the area you are in has a lot of people, this app is unavailable for your own safety and happiness, and sort of controlling a little bit more how much interaction you're having with people, and if you're really lost. Finally, an idea that I've been thinking about for a while, moving city to city and meeting people in these cities who are looking for something, and I think that's the reason people keep moving city in a way. They're looking for something, and they're looking for maybe something they're not finding in these cities that they're going to. Now, when you go to the big cities, you see this Time Out magazine in London. There are the difference. Why I left that seaside town was a feeling that if I stayed there, there was just not so many people coming together to share these ideas. And in London, there was a much bigger draw of sharing ideas, sharing in infrastructure, sharing. You could go to a really specific music store that just wouldn't exist in the smaller town because there's not enough demand, there's not enough people there. And thinking about the 70s and these communes that appeared, of people coming together and wanting to share something, and so much so that they were, get all naked and get in a bus and drive off to be with each other and share this thing. And that sort of died out. It didn't work. And what I see happening a lot with the digital world is this idea of being crowdsourced in a virtual sense, people coming together and starting things up by being able to connect with the people they want to, regardless of location. And wondering, if you take that idea and move it in and see that because of maybe the architectural way of building, the sort of building a city from scratch in the middle of Kazakhstan is not something, maybe we're not all going to go there. It's not something we haven't been asked. We're losing a little bit of control over the cities that we're living in, and we're bouncing around trying to find these places that we want to live in. And what if we could find the people that we want to live with, the things we really want to share, and crowdsource some cities and sort of take control again over urbanism. So before we would all meet at a river because we were walking that way and getting our natural materials, and that's gone now. Our materials are much more virtual, they're much more non-haptic. So maybe you could literally source a crowd and have a population goal. You could say how many people you want to live with, what sort of a place, and it's not too weird. I've been dealing with kindergarten spots in Munich, and they're quite specific. They were looking for a 2-year-old girl from this area in order to find themselves a nicely mixed kindergarten, and this is for, you can't get in if you've got a boy. And just extrapolating that to find places that we want to live with maybe shared interests and enough shared infrastructure is just one way of thinking about urbanism of the future. And that's it. So thank you very much, and keep loving Munich.